8 or 9 years ago, I was turning 39 into turning 39 to 40 years old. And I've started having these wild symptoms out of the blue. And I, c- I didn't know what was happening to me. I started having severe vertigo, especially when I was driving or if I had to look at a camera. Now, during that time, I wouldn't be able to sit here and look at this camera that I'm looking at now and not feel like I was about ready to get sick, like my eyes were shaking, and then have severe vertigo. Then, when I was driving, like at certain roads, if I was going on an overpass and there was different levels of the road, like if you're going over a road and the highways underneath, I couldn't do that without feeling like my car was going like this. And it would cause me to feel like I was gonna pass out. And then all of a sudden, sometimes I would be driving and I would go into a full blown panic attack. My blood pressure would drop. There was two times I actually had to call an ambulance for myself because my blood pressure had dropped so low, I was fixing to pass out. And I remember pulling into an elementary school and I'm like, what is going on? And now, mind you, during this time, I was also I had a real bad physical alcohol addiction, and I contributed it to that. But once I sobered up, these things kept happening. I'm like, oh God, maybe I did some damage to myself, or maybe, I got cancer or something's wrong. And I remember these things would be happening. I would sleep 12 hours a night only to wake up extremely exhausted and have to take like a 4 hour nap. So I finally went to my first doctor. And on top of it, I was getting skin issues. I was getting skin issues on my foot and on my chest and on my back really bad. So I went to my doctor. I'm like, what is happening to me? And they were like, oh, it could be MS, or you might have osteoporosis, or you have rheumatoid arthritis, or maybe lupus. The one doctor told me that I was just having anxiety attacks. And I'm like, well, obviously I am, but why? What is happening? I had been sober for like a year and a half. The alcohol was out of my system. I had done all the work that needed to be done, yet nobody could tell me what was happening to me. So he told me that I had athlete's foot and that I had a yeast infection on my skin. And he did all the labs. He's like, there's nothing wrong with you. And he told me to put some athlete's foot cream on my skin and to be done with it. But what about the vertigo? Well, we don't know what's going on. You might have MS, but we're not sure. You don't have the telltale signs, so we can't do anything for you. We can't even send you to get a CAT scan. I'm like, what is happening here? So I found another doctor. And this time, this lady was like, oh, there's something severely wrong. Let's go get your eyes checked first. Got my eyes checked. I had perfect vision. Nothing was wrong yet. I was having some, fogginess and blurriness along with these vertigo episodes. And she said, well, you might have a tumor. Well, that terrified me because my father actually died from a tumor in his brain. So I'm like, oh my God, what's going to happen? So she sent me for a CAT scan. Again, she ran all the labs. Everything was perfect. I might have had a little bit of inflammation, but no big deal. Um, I asked her to check my hormones, and she said, there's nothing showing me in your symptoms that would need me to check your hormones. So I'm like, okay. She checked my cholesterol, said my cholesterol was really high. Not really high, just elevated. Well, obviously, because during this time, I was also gaining like 10 pounds. My chest started to grow, for lack of better words, and I was normally a very small chested person. Now all of a sudden I have these objects on my chest that I never had before. I literally thought I was dying. Um, so I'm like, something's happening. What is going on? And she sent me for the CAT scan. Of course, it came back clear, and she said it was all in my head. That maybe I needed to be put on depression medicine, and that I need to quit trying to make something out of nothing. I'm like, okay, something out of nothing. I literally was afraid to drive. And I was a very independent person before that. And it literally made me isolate because I was afraid I was going to be driving and have one of those panic attacks and pass out and kill somebody, or I was going to feel like I was spinning and, turn the wheel in the direction that I felt everything was going, and that I would kill, a family or kids, or it was worse than being drunk, And I was so desperate. So after that, these were all primary care doctors. So I'm like, well, maybe I need to talk to my gynecologist. I talked to her, and she's like, no, there's nothing wrong with you. Skin issues don't happen with perimenopause or menopause. You're too young. I really think that we need to discuss what's happening in your home, because it sounds to me like you're having some mental health issues. And I was like, oh my God, my home life is fine. The only problem is that I'm terrified to drive, and, that there's just things happening that have never happened before. And she's like, well, you did do a lot of drinking in the past. I'm like, that has nothing to do with this, because at this point it was 3 years, 3 or 4 years. And, she gaslighted me. She made me feel bad for wanting to know what was happening to my body. So instead of helping me figure that out, she gaslighted me and told me, oh, it's something happening in your home life. Do you feel safe? I'm like, yes, I feel safe. Me and my husband have a wonderful relationship. He's terrified for me. He doesn't know what's happening. And we want to figure this out. And, you know, I finally found another doctor who was like, okay, there's definitely something happening, but we don't know what. Okay, she ran all the tests again. She ran multiple tests. My vitamin D was a little low. My vitamin B was a little low, but my hormones were checking out fine, of course, because we don't know what part, or, what stage. At the time, she didn't understand what stage my hormones were at to understand what was happening. And I'm like, I'm telling you, I think I'm in perimenopause. And at this point, I was 44, 45 years old. And she's like, you're too young for that. You don't show all the symptoms. Um, she sent me to a dermatologist for my skin. And I had done every diet. I went gluten free, anti inflammatory, very clean eating, all natural foods, no parabens, no artificial flavors. And still, I had this horrible skin rash. But now it was also on the back of my arms. And I'm like, something is going on. And my skin was so itchy. Like, nothing that I used worked. So she sent me to a dermatologist, and I come back that I was allergic to parabens. I don't use parabens though, and they dismissed me too. They're like, "Well, this doesn't happen with hormone shifts." I'm like, "Okay." You Google and you see all around all different kinds of conversations out there that yes, this does happen during hormone shifts, but yet certain doctors weren't on the up and up with it. So again, I went searching for another doctor, and finally, somebody said, we're going to do a very comprehensive panel. I need to know exactly where you're at in your period cycle. And now, mind you, this is on year 7.5 to 8. So at this time, I'm 47, turning about, no, 46, turning 47. And he's like, let's run a really deep, comprehensive panel. My vitamin D came back extremely low. The one thing they didn't test, and I don't know why, was my ferritin. They did check my iron, my total iron binding capacity, and that was a little elevated, but nothing too alarming. Um, but they didn't check my ferritin for whatever reason. But she did like all the inflammatory markers. They checked me for lupus. They checked me for, um, you know, psoriasis. They checked me for, um, gosh, what, well, I said lupus. They also checked me for Sjorgen syndrome. I think that's, or Raynaud syndrome. They checked me for all these things. My C-reactive protein level came back a little elevated, and my ANA was a little elevated, but not enough to send me to a rheumatoid to figure this out. Um, I was also tested for thyroid, which I have Hashimoto's. So that could have been a little bit of the inflammation, but it wasn't like scary high. Like my thyroid was 4 when normally it was 1. So he went ahead and started me on levothyroxine, which helped a little, like with my migraines and stuff. But I was still gaining weight, like 10 pounds a year. So at this point, I had went from 125 pounds to now 170. So over this time period of all this happening, I literally gained 50 pounds. And I attributed it to the fact that I couldn't wake up, that I couldn't stay awake all day, and it just kept getting worse and worse. And he said my vitamin D was low, so he wanted to do a 3 month bolus of vitamin D, which means your normal daily intake is about 1,000 IUs to 3,000 IUs. Some women will take 5,000. A bolus is where they give you a form of vitamin D3 at 55,000 IUs every single day for like 3 months. So he did that for 3 months and it came up. Of course, it went back down because nobody was attributing this to perimenopause and my hormones and all the fluctuations. Now, during this time, I also developed IBS. So he referred me to a gastro, and comes to find out I had GERD and I didn't know I had it. So they did a colonoscopy on me and an endo, to which I ended up stopping breathing on the table, but that's here or there. That has nothing to do with perimenopause and menopause. It was human error of how much they gave me. But still, I had something else to recover from when I already didn't have the energy to begin with. So I noticed when I did the prep work that, after the colonoscopy, my bowels were better. So I brought that up to the gastro, and she's like, well, let's put you on some stomach meds because I kept coughing and stuff, and it felt like I always had a lump in my throat, but I didn't have heartburn per se. Um, so I'm like, okay, let's try this medicine. And I'm not one to take medicine. If there's a natural way for me to relieve symptoms, even when I'm sick, I don't, unless it's bacterial, I don't go running to the doctor unless I know it's like strep or, like a lung infection or something like that. I'm not one to run to the doctor. Even when I had COVID, I didn't go to the doctor. I tested to make sure I had it. That's what it was. So I knew to isolate. And I, I home treated myself. There's nothing they can do. I don't believe in taking all those medicines personally myself. You make your own personal choice. But the whole point is that I'm a very natural person as far as what I ingest. I don't like depleting my own body's immune system by adding chemicals to it. So, and it's worked very well for me. I'm hardly ever sick. So, the fact that they were putting me on levothyroxine and now pantoprazole for my stomach was really bothering me. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go back to I'm going to try a different gynecologist and see if I can get some answers. So I started doing some research before I just called, which I had on a couple of my doctors. They were very well, you know, recommended. They had great reviews, all of those things. But I'm like, I need a doctor who is there not doctors who specialize in perimenopause or menopause. So I got to doing some research and I finally came across the Menopause Society or I think it was the American Menopause Association at the time, and they have shifted into Menopause Society. But I looked for providers in my area on their website and I finally found somebody. So I'm like, fantastic. And I went there. I made this appointment. I was there for, she was with me for like an hour and a half. And she actually passed off her patients to other people because she wanted a timeline of everything that had happened over the 8 years. She wanted my complete history with it. And I told her everything. She goes, "You've been in perimenopause since you were 39." And I remember just sitting there and I started crying like, thank you. Somebody finally saw me and didn't give me that whiny women syndrome and just passed me off to shut me up and try to prescribe me something. Um, she's like, "I want to do another run of labs." And she checked my whole iron panel. She checked that. She checked um, all my, my follicle stimulating, my luteinizing, all of the hormones you're supposed to check. And sure enough, I was in perimenopause. Not drastically, but my estrogen was low. It was like at 100, and I believe they like you to be at 300. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure my follicle stimulating hormone was a little elevated and my progesterone was really high. Um, which doesn't mean you don't need progesterone. You need something to level you out so your body gets used to that constant. Um, and that, she gave me a lot of we made another appointment so I could come back after my lab work come back so we could talk about it and she could provide me with some education. She, I went back and my ferritin was so low that I should have had a blood transfusion. That's how low my iron was. So my oxygen levels had been running low. My blood pressure was running a little bit high for me. And she's like, "You either need a blood transfusion or we need to get you started on medical iron infusions, like IV infusions of iron." She goes, "To correct this." I'm like, okay, because my hemoglobins, my baby red blood cells were really high too because I didn't have mature red blood cells to carry the oxygen and nutrients that my body needed. So I was literally like from the inside almost suffocating myself. How scary is that? Um, and it has a lot to do with, your iron has a lot to do with metabolism, has a lot to do with where the nutrients go in your body. It has a lot to do with carrying oxygen to your organs. So my heart was under pressure. I couldn't, I was really short of breath. My hair was falling out and thinning. Um, and we immediately started that. So I had to go to a cancer center and get those iron infusions done. So after I had those, meanwhile, she started me on estrogen and progesterone. At first, the estrogen was real low dose. It was 0.5, I think, milligrams, and my progesterone was cyclic. So I would take it for 2 weeks and then off 2 weeks. And because of where my progesterone was spiking, because my estrogen was low, we had to adjust so I wasn't constantly bleeding. Hold on one second. So we got that all took care of, and meanwhile I'm still bleeding, right? And she felt we did an internal ultrasound, and I have adenomyosis, which means it's kind of the opposite of endometriosis. It's where you don't completely shed your endometrium, and it just goes into the muscle of your uterus. So that muscle just keeps getting thicker and thicker. So she felt I needed an ablation or a hysterectomy. So we talked to a surgeon and I scheduled an ablation, and I have not had a period since August of this year. So at this point, I'm 48, okay? Um, I've had my estrogen increased to 2 milligrams. I've had my progesterone increased to every day and to 200 milligrams. And it's been a lifesaver, but there was still one thing missing. And I had talked to her about it, and she said, she gave me some education and literature on what atrophy is, about all the changes that happen in your feminine intimate areas during this, even if you're on things. You know, even when you are taking hormones and you use a hormone patch or an estroidal cream or testosterone cream. The one thing she hasn't tested though is my testosterone. So in my next appointment coming up soon, that is something I'm gonna have tested. Um, I'm kind of weary on testosterone because I do have, that middle belly weight gain, and I don't want to amplify that. So I'm a little leery on for my history on testosterone, but the one thing I want to also share is during this time, my mammograms, because I have breast cancer history in my family that's really high, I was doing mammograms. So I would get my I've been doing mammograms since I was 27, but then it changed to my mammogram. I'd have a mammogram, and then 6 months later, I would have an MRI because my breast tissue was so dense, and they were afraid that I would develop cancer and they would never catch it. Um, Through taking these hormones, I now have a clear mammogram. So, a lot of that myth about taking hormones and it causing breast cancer, that's not necessarily true. What's true though is if you have really dense breast tissue and you're not helping your body to clear that out, what's going to happen is you could end. That's why a lot of women at stage 4 is when they first discover that they have breast cancer, is because they can't see it. So and I've been able to actually stop doing the MRI part of it because my tissue has cleared up so good. Um, so that's a plus. My skin is better. And I can always tell when my estrogen is dropping lower because my skin will flare up again. I'll get the hot flashes again and the night sweats, and my hair starts thinning. So those are my body's cues of, okay, you're having another shift. And I'll also get insomnia. Um, and she also validated that my skin was caused from perimenopause. Because what happens is, as your estrogen drops, you're losing the ability to fight inflammation. And it's not necessarily like real eczema. Like, if she were to test me for eczema, it would not come up that I have eczema. It's a topical skin type of eczema that's happening. And like with my foot, it's not athlete's foot. I've thrown everything under the kitchen sink at this, and nothing cures it. And I talked to her, and I was like, when I went through puberty, my hands would peel. And I would get, the rough skin on my hands and they would peel. And as soon as I left puberty, it went away. So she said, we just need to treat it like eczema topically until you're out of this hormone shift, because that's when it started. And it made so much sense. I felt seen and heard. But back to the dryness, the feminine dryness issues, I still have issues with that. And she said that's going to be part of it because your skin's thinning. The inflammation that goes on dehydrates your skin. And because of that, you're going to go through tissue changes. And I'm like, okay. And, she recommended her choice lubrications and her choice, creams that she uses and she recommends to her patients, but nothing was working. It was either dried up too quick, and then I would bleed after, being intimate with my husband, or it would really irritate me, and things would sting, and I didn't want that. That's not fun. And I was ending up with bladder infections and all this stuff because of how much, and it gets sticky and ugh, it's kind of gross. So I'm like, I want to develop something that's for women, not for men, and not for younger bodies. I wanted something that I could help women with in this that complemented any creams or any patches or any medication or hormone replacement therapy that they were on, that they could use immediately for those intimate moments, but also helped with the dryness, the healing of the dryness, the pH balance. Because when your pH balance gets off, that's when bacteria starts to grow, and that's when you end up with bladder infections and yeast infections and all those things. So I wanted something that would help with that and keep the tissue plump so you wouldn't get atrophy, because atrophy is painful. If you think about it, there's different types of atrophy. So there's muscle atrophy, like when somebody's been in a hospital a long time, they get muscular atrophy, and that's when their tissue, their muscles become really thin and frail, and they kind of just disappear. It's like their body eats and they become real frail. That's what happens to the tissue. And a lot of women say, everything's shrinking. I don't have, those same body parts that I used to have being exposed. And it's really hard to reach climax too. So I wanted something that, was all natural from number one, no parabens, that provided moisture for those immediate needs, but also promoted health, and something that women can use every single day on externally and internally. So that's where I came up with Saluna for Women. And it's an all natural product. We are in pre sales right now. So if you're watching this, this is November of 2025 right now. If you're watching this in the future, I don't see this product going away anytime soon because it's getting really good feedback. Women are wanting this product, and but right now we're in pre-sales, which means you get it at a 40% discount, and you become part of the founding member circle with all sorts of benefits. And I'm gonna put the link for it in the description of this video, so you can get your hands on it now. You can look at what it, have a look at the website, see what it is, recommend it to friends. If you're part of the founding member circle, you also get an affiliate link, so you get a chance to earn money with this. And I'm really excited about this because finally, not only are we getting influencers who are doctors that are spreading the word about this, we are, it's bringing in a whole new sector of women's healthcare that, we get to talk about. It's destigmatizing this. And I even asked my mom, I'm like, because my mom went through a hysterectomy, and I'm the only one in my family who has actually kept my uterus this long. Everybody else had a hysterectomy, but that's what their answers were back then. If you had all these issues, they're like, we just need to give you a hysterectomy and throw them into immediate menopause instead of figuring out the balance. And on top of it, they weren't given HRT because it was based off of that study that terrified everybody that if you take HRT, you're going to die. And that's not true. They've had new studies out. And on top of it, they're finding what it helps stop in women. My mom didn't have that opportunity. And because of it, she was 70 years old, and she got sick right when COVID first came out. They thought it was RSV or same, but I think she had COVID. But she coughed and she broke 2 vertebrae because her bones were that frail. Now she's on medicine to help build her bones instead of her, they didn't provide her with the estrogen she needed. And she's had breast cancer, and, she didn't have what her body needed. So, I highly encourage you to speak with your doctor if you're scared. If they're dismissing it, you need to find somebody who is a menopause trained doctor to discuss this. I'm also going to put the menopausesociety.org link below, and click on the providers link, and you're going to see a list of providers in your area. Wherever you're at, find your area, and you're going to see the list of doctors in your area for this, that have more training than 30 minutes, which is all a doctor gets going through medical school. So I'm going to keep talking about this. And I hope this was informative. I hope you saw yourself in my story, because I want you to know you're not alone. It's very debilitating when you don't have a doctor who listens and just dismisses you like you're being whiny or depressed, or, you're making this up in your head. You're not. Okay? I know you. I know you're not. I see you and I hear you. And it's very frustrating because it's not like it's for a month, it's for years, years and years. A better part of our midlife is spent going through this transition. And the hormones are what makes up a woman's equilibrium inside her body. It's how her body communicates with every single part. And it's so important. And I'm so glad this topic is reaching more people. I'm so glad more people are stepping up to speak on this and doing the research for it. And yeah, I'm super grateful. Anyway, be sure to check out Saluna for Women. And hey, let me know what your thoughts are on this episode. Make a comment, subscribe to my channel. Either you're watching this on YouTube or on all the podcast platforms. Make sure you subscribe. I will be bringing on very important guests and doctors and specialists on here to discuss the different things that need to be talked about when it comes to this topic. So for now, I will talk to you soon. Bye.